Hello again. Well, I don't have to tell you twice that 2020 has been a tough year for many of us. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously had a very negative impact on us. Now, some people lost their livelihoods and some people lost loved ones. It's not surprising that fatigue, stress and depression have set in and continue to plague us. Let's discuss now mental exhaustion, how that negatively impacts us, especially with year-end fatigue and possible burnout. I'm chatting now to clinical psychologist Samukelisiwe Mthembu. Samukelisiwe, thank you so much for your time. And we were chatting to an endocrinologist before we came to you, and there we were looking at what the physical symptoms might be, what underlying conditions might exacerbate year-end fatigue and burnout. And she left off saying that if you don't find any of those, a lot of this could be psychological and emotional. What are the emotional, mental, psychological signs that we might be in at year-end fatigue or actually burnout?
So usually, people will start feeling reluctant to wake up in the morning, even headaches, which have no medical cause or kind of medical roots, and also just trying to avoid work, not feeling like you are 100% in the workplace when you are there. And then when you leave to get back to work in the morning, it's strenuous. It kind of feels like you're being pulled down, and in a sense, a little bit like depression.
So how long would symptoms like this indicate that this is not just a once-off, I'm feeling down today? Would it be 2 days? Would it be 3 days? Would it be a week that I would have to be feeling this way to recognize that this is something more serious?
So genuinely, yes, the symptoms have to span over a certain period of time. But, it's different for different people, so we can't put a blanket term and say, if you're feeling perhaps this way for 2, 3, 4 weeks, then you're suffering from burnout. For some people, they could be more sensitive to burnout, based on the kind of job that they do. So for some people, let's say it's a very strenuous job, like, for example, health professions or something like services that are constantly working with people. Sometimes it could be after a few shifts where you feel that way. Or because you don't get enough leave, or maybe you get leave, and then when you do that, you do family responsibility and other things. And when you come back, you're telling yourself in your mind that you're supposed to be at rest or rested, but you are still feeling very tired. So it's more symptoms related rather than I can say a period or a time span that says after you feel this way for a certain amount of time, then you're suffering from burnout.
Is there a checklist? Is there a list of questions that I should be asking myself at a certain point? Sort of like, do you feel this way? Has this lasted for so long? Can you give us some idea of the chat I have to have with myself to recognize that I might need some help, or I might need to start doing something differently?
So definitely fatigue. So it's just that exhaustion where you have no energy is definitely on that checklist. And then things like headaches, the minor headaches that you experience while you're at the workplace. And then also things like using substances to survive at the workplace, where you're trying to get more oomph and energy from the substances that you use so that you can get up in the morning and do the daily tasks that you need to be doing. But you're not at the standard, even still, having used those substances. So, for some people it's alcohol or some kind of energy drink or some kind of pill or energizer that they're using now a bit too much, and it also isn't producing the effects that are desired in terms of keeping up at work. So those three things are generally at the top of the list. So it's the headaches, the fatigue, and also then using a substance to try and keep up. And then there are other things like loss of, I can say passion or enthusiasm in your job, where often in the health professions, we call it something called compassion fatigue, where instead of helping someone, or let's say you maybe also working at a cashier or somewhere in service or even behind the desk, and someone calls and then you just dismissive of them and you get angry. So you get irritable, you get frustrated easily, and it's no longer something that's pleasant to engage in doing a job, but rather it feels like it's a nuisance. And that's when people just generally say people are grumpy or whatever the case is, but that person could actually be suffering from burnout.
Could something like this unchecked lead to depression and something even more serious than that?
Definitely. So some people really do push themselves to the edge, and it could lead to stress disorders, anxiety disorders, especially for those who start to take to or gravitate towards the substances, and then they start getting anxious as side effects. And then there's also things like more maybe towards the medical and psychological side, where you get a panic attack or just a breakdown at work, or even, you know, the other extremes are stroke and other things, which basically indicate that the body has had enough, and it's a defense mechanism where the body actually shuts down. And often people will then report having blackouts at work, or one moment they were standing by the photocopying machine and then next they were hitting the floor. So when it's being ignored, when burnout is being ignored, it's almost as if it's the first sign of warning, kind of like the warning sign that goes on, maybe the amber light, you can say, when you're in the traffic lights. And then eventually, if it's not taken care of, it leads to something more serious or severe.
So I would imagine that this year in particular is going to add stress upon stress, because it's a COVID year, it's a pandemic year, it's people having to change how they function, how they would normally maybe find ways to relax, be with family, be with friends. What are people telling you? And I'm sure that the people who come to you for help, your patients, are sort of pouring their heart out to you. What are they saying to you, Samukelisiwe? What are their big concerns? What are they battling to cope with and deal with?
You know, the one that's been the biggest is actually the unrealistic demands that a company or workplace will place on its employees because of the impact that COVID has had. So, you know, with the added financial strain of salaries having been cut and people not getting their bonuses as usual, businesses and corporations are trying to make up for the gap that was created by COVID. And that has actually led them to place these unrealistic demands on employees to still produce the same amount of work for less amount of pay. And there's also reduced holiday times, reduced leave, now that we're heading into Christmas, because of the work that people have to keep covering up in terms of keeping the financial upkeep of a business. So it's kind of turned into a sense of modern day slavery, if I can put it that way, because of the way that the COVID has placed a lot of financial strains on corporations.
And I'm sure it's not just worrying about what's happening today, what's happening at the end of the year. A lot of people are already worrying about next year and what's going to happen in 2021 and how they're going to cope. And that is sort of like a never-ending road, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Samukelisiwe, it's also that time of year where ordinarily we'd expect to have all the good news stories come out. We're looking at festive cheer, we're looking at, normally we'd look at Christmas shopping and settling down and celebrating with family. But it almost seems like with us in the media business as well, it's really not a time of year where we can actually switch off around what's happening in the country. Like you say, the economy is one thing that we're thinking about constantly. We're still looking at things like whether it's state capture, and we're looking at corruption. We're dealing with gender-based violence at the moment as well, and you know, stories that are going to come to the fore more than ever. How do we switch off? And how, I mean, I'm sure that forms a big part of year-end fatigue and burnout, is having to absorb all of that stuff, deal with it, wonder how it's affecting us and the people around us. Do we switch off? Do we not switch off? How do we deal with that, with being bombarded with information like that coming our way at a time of year when we should be able to just breathe?
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm sure. So as you're saying it, you realize that
I'm exhausted
so
already. Yeah,
it's being placed on us, but also just to survive and to keep going, because there's that response to have to survive. You know, if you've got kids to think about, you've got your parents or grandparents to think about, and you can't just tell yourself that you will switch off and relax. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that there's certain things that you have to do in order not to actually break down or just die. From a stroke or from the stress and the strains that everything has led to in the current state that we're in as a country and as a world. But one thing that I find does help is to never stop communicating your needs, because as soon as you do that, that's when people will push for more. So longer hours, or family members will push for more in terms of, the festive season. This is when usually people are trying to extend their houses, get money from people, because it's generally the time of year where people also got bonuses. So when you're constantly communicating your needs, you're constantly pushing back in terms of that demand that's being placed on you that leads you to end up depleting your resources and then burn out, and then other things that that associated with burnout, like depression, anxiety, suicide, drinking, and then the drinking leads to fights and then gender-based violence, because it all links in together. So what generally tends to happen is, or what generally tends to help, is just to constantly be honest with yourself and constantly communicate your needs, to push back towards a system. And that could be your workplace, it could be your family, it could be your partner, it could be yourself, that you're placing a lot of demands on yourself that are unrealistic. So when you go back to a vision board and you write it down on a piece of paper, or you talk to a friend that you trust, or you go visit your psychologist or psychiatrist, and you get another perspective, which helps you put things in perspective and also helps you not to feel alone, and find resources of how to cope in a difficult time like this. There may be a relief fund that you're not aware of that you're entitled to. There may be certain things that you can shift around where there is hope. So the two things I'd say is be honest with yourself, the three things: be honest with yourself, get perspective, and try and always find hope and resources and getting help.
And while we're talking about what we're being bombarded with, social media, I'm sure, plays a big part in not allowing us to just take a break. Should we just say for the next 3 weeks or for the whole of December, I'm not going to be on social media? Or, you know, is it okay to just pop in and check what's going on? Because it seems to be a red flag that comes up often, you know, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, or whatever it is, that kind of might contribute to that fatigue at the end of the year and possibly more serious burnout.
Because, you know, social media, what it does is it makes you, well, you know, based on some research, it makes you compare yourself constantly to the next person who seems to have it better than you. And it's not just in terms of, you know, the general Instagram, Facebook, you know, other things, but just, you know, the advertisement that pops up of, you know, a plasma screen TV that you may have wanted to buy, but because of Corona, you're not in the greatest financial position. And even though this is the time of year where you're supposed to be rewarding yourself for good years of work and getting that bonus, you're no longer able to do that. But that doesn't stop the advertisement from popping up and, you know, saying, buy this, you know, as if you should have money for that. And you should be living this kind of lifestyle, or Christmas time, buying gifts for those loved ones. And so I think, again, what generally tends to help is to pull back and just focus on the things that make you happy and the things that you really need, prioritizing, writing those lists, being honest with yourself again, being honest with your bank account, being honest with your pockets, and not constantly comparing yourself to the next person. So you constantly have to remind yourself of what's really important when it comes to family or children, the things that you really need. Because also one thing that the lockdown did teach us is that how much of our lifestyles are actually contributing to our well-being, and how much of them are actually, what we're doing on the daily is actually contributing to depression, isolation, and an unsustainable lifestyle. And, you know, and it also forces us to almost reinvent the way that we live and reinvent ourselves in terms of catering for our mental health and our medical health and, you know, other aspects in life which really do matter.
So let's go talk a little bit more about that self-care then. What are the little things we can do that might not cost anything, actually, from the time we open our eyes till we go to bed every night? What are the little things we can do to make sure that we are nourishing ourselves mentally, if I could put it that way, so that we can minimize the effects of year-end fatigue or burnout and make sure we don't carry this into the new year with us?
So the way I like to explain it to some clients is imagine, you know, a triangle of needs. The basic at the bottom is just to satisfy your basic needs to survive. So make sure you're eating well, make sure you're doing the physical exercises. And if you can't able to do or not able to do a physical exercise, go dancing, something that you will enjoy if you're not enjoying the closed gym setting, or going for a walk, or playing a game with your kids, or playing a PlayStation game that requires you to move, or like a Nintendo Wii. Anything that has to do with you moving physically to get that pent-up stress in your body out. And then we go up the triangle a bit and we start to focus on, job satisfaction. Sit down and review. Are you happy at work? Is it time to apply for other jobs? Is it a time to maybe start your own business? And what are the options you have in a time like this? Shift, movements. Constantly people are stuck in routine, and the routine is actually draining them every day. So finding certain things about your routine that will assist. And we hear this sometimes every day when we say, you must exercise, you must eat well, you must think about, are you happy? But we never sometimes take the initiative to actually start changing those things. And it's actually very basic, but something as simple as writing your thoughts on a piece of paper, or doing a vision board in terms of collecting pictures if you don't enjoy writing, or starting an electronic journal on your computer or on your phone, actually makes a big difference, because you actually start to see yourself not only in your mind, because if it's constantly replaying in your mind, sometimes it gets stuck in there and it doesn't come to fruition. So seeing it on a piece of paper, seeing it written down, or seeing some kind of vision board on Pinterest or whatever the case may be, motivates one to actually have hope and get up and start doing those self-care techniques. And also getting a partner that will force you to wake up in the morning and go jog, where it's not just relying on you to make the decision to actually engage in self-care, but if it's a familial thing, or if it's a group thing with you and your friends, then it actually motivates you to get up and actually start doing things with self-care.
Yeah.
And then there's the other one where getting professional help, going to your psychologist. If you can't afford a psychologist, seek out a counselor. If not a counselor, pastoral care, which is something that is often free. As you were saying before, what are the free things? And just start engaging in those things which are quite motivating you to not experience or feel burnout.
Yeah, so self-care and self-love, things that we actually take for granted, and we actually don't get up and do those things and make the effort. Thank you very much, Samukelisiwe Mthembu. They're simple things you need to do for yourself. Make yourself a priority for once in your life. Do it. Don't burn out. Try to prevent that. We'll continue our discussion. We've been talking about nutrition. We've been talking about exercise. That's on the way.